Welcome everyone, it's a great pleasure to give this online presentation and I would like to thank the organizers for their kind invitation. I am Sandra Van Aert from the EMAT Electron Microscopy Group of the University of Antwerp. The aim of my talk is to show strategies for quantifying 3D atomic structures of nanomaterials and their dynamics using scanning transmission electron microscopy. And in a quantitative framework, the aim is to extract precise numbers for the unknown structure parameters, including atom positions, atom types, and number of atoms from the experimental images. Therefore, we make use of statistical parameter estimation theory. And the key concept of this theory is the use of a parametric model to describe the underlying observations. Since ADF STEM images are peaked at the atomic column positions, each intensity peak is modeled as a Gaussian function of which we estimate the height, the width, and the position. The estimated parameters correspond to the model best matching the underlying observations, and they are obtained by minimizing the least square sum. This optimization involves an iterative refinement in a huge dimensional parameter space. And we have implemented this algorithm in the open source software StatStem, which can be downloaded from this link. The estimated positions result in quantitative measurements for the atomic column positions, and based on the height and width, the volume under each Gaussian function can be estimated. This is a so-called scattering cross-section, which for STEM imaging is very sensitive for the atom type and number of atoms in a column. Here you see the increase of scattering cross-sections with increasing number of platinum atoms in a column determined from simulated images. And the most straightforward manner for atom counting is to directly compare estimated scattering cross-sections with this simulated library. And this procedure is then repeated for each atomic column. Now, in order to validate results and to quantify the precision, we make use of a hybrid method in which this simulation-based atom counting method is combined with an independent statistics-based method, which is summarized on this slide. Here you see the same image of a platinum particle as on the previous slide, for which we estimate the scattering cross-sections. And ideally, the histogram of scattering cross-sections for all atomic columns in this image would consist of isolated components where a step in intensity in the horizontal direction corresponds to an extra atom in a column. In practice, however, the components are smeared out owing to a combination of experimental detection noise and the environment. In order to determine the number of components and their locations, we make use of a so-called Gaussian mixture model analysis. This method enables us to decompose the distribution of scattering cross-sections into overlapping normal distributions, as explained in detail in the papers mentioned here. Next, all columns whose scattering cross-sections correspond to the first component are assigned 1 atom. If they correspond to the second component, 2 atoms are assigned, up to a maximum of 10 atoms in this example. An important challenge is now to balance atom counting reliability and structural damage by optimizing the electron dose, as is illustrated here. Here you see an image of a platinum wedge for an electron dose of only 1050 electrons per angstrom squared, from which we estimated scattering cross-sections. However, the presence of electron shot noise causes severe overlap in the normal distributions of scattering cross-sections related to columns of different thickness. And this results in an atom counting error of plus or minus 2 atoms. This is also clear in this 3D atomic model where we have placed the atoms symmetrically around a common plane. And the limited atom counting reliability gives the impression of a rough surface. If we increase the electron dose, the overlap between neighboring components reduces the atom counting error to plus or minus 1 atom. And also the 3D model now shows a cleaner surface. When further increasing the electron dose, one can imagine that the atom counting reliability improves, but on the other hand, the risk for structural changes will also increase. And the question is then how to optimize the electron dose. And therefore, a statistical framework was proposed and experimentally verified in this paper. And this enables an investigator to theoretically predict the optimal electron dose before conducting the experiment. If we consider a surface displacement of platinum atoms on a 100 substrate, the surface diffusion energy decreases, resulting in lower values for the optimal electron dose, whereas at the same time, the probability for beam-induced surface diffusion increases. Both the atom counting precision and the risk for damage can be reduced when reducing the incident electron energy. Moreover, for thin samples such as graphene, a reduction of the inner detector angle may significantly help to detect the presence of, for example, nitrogen on graphene and to avoid surface diffusion. If our ultimate aim would be to observe hydrogen atoms on graphene, it will become hard to detect hydrogen in the presence of scan noise even under optimal conditions for the electron dose and the acceleration voltage. However, if future developments help us to overcome scan noise, then this theory predicts that we should be able to observe hydrogen, although the contrast will still be very weak. And that brings me to a method that we introduced to identify single atoms in an objective manner. Here, for example, you see an experimental image of graphene, and in the absence of a priori knowledge, it is very subjective to determine the number of Gaussian peaks that should be refined. One can fit models with increasing number of carbon atoms as shown here, and the fit with the underlying data will improve. And some people will like this model, for example, more than this model here, but this is a very subjective criterion. If we keep adding peaks, then at some point there will be overfitting. To overcome this problem, we introduced the so-called maximum a posteriori probability rule, or MAP in short, which can be used to predict the probability for a certain number of atomic columns given the experimental data. Here you see the evaluation of the MAP probability rule, predicting that the presence of 63 atomic columns is most likely, and the corresponding refined model clearly shows the expected graphene lattice without using prior knowledge concerning the expected atomic structure. From the atom counts, the goal is next to obtain the 3D atomic structure for nanomaterials where electron tomography cannot be used. When studying ultra-small germanium clusters, for example, one can see that during electron irradiation the cluster rotates and may show structural changes. To get the 3D structure, we built an initial model based on atom counting results, which was then fully relaxed using ab initio calculations. When investigating larger structures, such as this superstructure, which is formed by lead selenide quantum dots, a similar methodology can be used, where instead of ab initio calculations, a Monte Carlo approach for minimizing the total energy of the structure is used to determine this 3D atomic structure. This methodology of retrieving the 3D atomic structure from a single image opens up new prospects for analyzing in situ experiments. However, applying a similar methodology for images acquired in a gas environment is far from straightforward, because the signal-to-noise ratio and contrast gets significantly worse when imaging particles in a gas cell and in the flow of a selected gas, as shown here. Moreover, those images have been acquired at high speed, with a scan time of only 1 second for each frame, resulting into effects of kilohertz up to megahertz frequency distortions, which are very strong and often highly correlated along the fast scan direction. To overcome this problem, we trained a neural network to correct for fast scan distortions, jitter distortions, Poisson noise, and thermal noise. And for this purpose, we use simulated images, including a wide variety of crystal structures, elements, orientations, microscope parameters, amorphous layers, and so on. In particular, 10 million training images and 500,000 of validation images have been used. Here you see the effect of the neural network when applied to an experimental image, which can then be used as an input to estimate scattering cross-sections using parameter estimation and to reliably count the number of atoms. Here you see the 3D reconstruction in vacuum, But more interestingly, we can now follow changes of such particles under the flow of hydrogen and oxygen gases in this example. And we switch the gas flow once more, and this enables us to quantify refaceting of platinum nanoparticles with atomic resolution during various cycles. In this example, we obtained the 3D atomic structure models by analyzing the underlying images frame by frame. One of the challenges now is to investigate if we can enhance the reliability in the results by modeling the dynamics between successive frames using a so-called hidden Markov model. And this hidden Markov model depends on a set of parameters, including initial probabilities, which define the probabilities for a column to have a specific number of atoms in a column. In this simplified example, the probability to have one atom is twice as large as the probability to have 2 or 3 atoms in a column. The number of atoms in a column are the so-called hidden states, which we cannot measure directly. We observe them indirectly through the scattering cross-sections obtained from the ADF STEM images. The emission probability defines the probability of the scattering cross-sections. Given a certain number of atoms in a column, this is described by a normal distribution function. And from this, we can see that from one time step, the hidden Markov model is in fact equal to the Gaussian mixture model introduced in the statistics-based atom counting procedure. Instead of analyzing a time series of images frame by frame, we will now also estimate the transition probabilities, which in a sense model the dynamics of the nanoparticle. It defines probabilities for a given column of atoms to, for example, lose or gain an atom. Assumptions of the hidden Markov model are that the transition probabilities do not change over time and that the next state only depends on the previous states, but not on the states before that. Using a maximum likelihood estimation algorithm, the initial emission and transition probabilities are estimated. And in the next step, a so-called Viterbi algorithm is used to indicate the most likely state sequence. Using simulations of a hypothetical platinum nanoparticle, which is changing over time, we investigated the performance of the hidden Markov model as a function of electron dose. The percentage of correctly assigned atom counts is represented when using the hidden Markov model or when using a traditional frame-by-frame analysis, clearly showing the benefits of the new method. Here we applied the method to an experimental time series of images of a platinum catalyst nanoparticle using the hidden Markov model, and this clearly shows how the number of atoms changes over time. From these atom counts, we can see that while the total number of atoms remains constant, the number of atoms in the facets indicated in green decrease under the electron beam, indicating that the nanoparticle loses its faceted structure. From the transition probabilities, we estimate the probability of 4.6% for a surface atom to move to another column. And when taking into account the electron dose, an experimental value for the average cross-section for surface diffusion can be obtained. Finally, we investigated a time series of supported gold nanoparticles deposited on cerium dioxide at 400 degrees Celsius. And using the hidden Markov model, we could obtain atom counts. They have been used as an input for 3D modeling, visualizing the process where an entire 100 plane disappears and reappears. And the 3D models show that this layer jumping is accompanied by significant changes in the surface structure and size. And with this last example, I come to the conclusions of my talk, in which I have shown how quantitative STEM can be used to count the number of atoms with single atom sensitivity. We can now also predict the optimal dose by balancing atom counting reliability and the risk for damage, and detect single atoms from low-dose images. From the atom counts, we can get the 3D atomic structure and track the 3D dynamics using hidden Markov model. Finally, I would like to thank everyone involved in the different research topics shown throughout my presentation. And of course, I would like to thank the funding agencies, and I would like to thank you for listening.